Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is what if the US paid off its debt? Now, apparently, the US is in a lot of debt right now, and I can't see with the current situation in the world that has gotten any better over the past couple months, over the last year. So, this is the infographics show. We've done quite a few videos of his. He's doing a pretty good job, I'm not gonna lie. So, let's see what it's all about. Let's see how the US could fix it, or what would happen if they did.
This episode is brought to you by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to sign up using the link in the description will get their first 2 months free. All countries flirt with a national deficit at one time or another. But the USA, with more than $21 trillion in debt as of March 2018, is having a relationship with debt so close they're practically in bed together. This mega figure is greater than its economic output, and yes, it seems to keep on rising as a general trend. But how did the debt grow that high? And is there any way to bring the balance sheet back to zero? Why do countries get themselves into debt? And what are the methods for paying off the deficit? Today we take a look at the events leading up to the accumulation of this gigantic debt, and we determine if there is any way for the US to turn this massive deficit around in this episode of the infographic show, What If the US Paid Off Its Debt? Debt is created by either excessive spending or deep tax cuts. Sometimes, tax cuts are justified in order to spur the economy out of a recession. In 1939, the US debt was at $40 billion, and by the end of the Second World War, this rose to $271 billion. After some fluctuation,
now I assume that 40 debts is already counting in the inflation that happened over the years, because 40 million back then were certainly a lot more billions today, so... But I'm pretty sure he's done that.
It was still at $271 billion in 1957, but by 1977, it had risen to $699 billion.
Wow.
The US has a long and rich history of spending heavily on military. Since the nation's existence since 1776, it has spent 225 years at war and just 21 years in peace. That's 94% of the country's time at war and just 6% at peace. US debt spiked after the 9/11 attacks when America increased military spending to launch its well-organized War on Terror campaign. Between 2001 and 2017, the War on Terror cost $1.9 trillion, so it appears that much of the US debt is incurred by massive spending in an aggressive defense policy over a long sustained period of time. While some argue that jobs would be lost by a reduced expenditure
The whole idea is obviously to prevent stuff, not to fix stuff, but actually to prevent stuff.
on defense, a counter-argument is that other industries could be created. Other factors, besides war, contributing to the rise in debt include the $24.7 billion Hurricane Katrina disaster and a $350 billion bank bailout. The current financial situation is, however you look...
Wait, what exactly does he mean? I mean, I get hurricanes. The US has to deal a lot with hurricanes. Even I don't think there's a hurricane going around right now, but for anyone watching this, isn't there a huge snowstorm actually right now? And what does he mean by bank bailout?
In debt include the $24.7 billion Hurricane Katrina disaster and a $350 billion bank bailout. The current financial situation is, however you look at it, a bit of a mess. The country hasn't always been broke. In January of 1835, the US government succeeded in paying off its entire national debt, in full for the first time in its history, but slipped back into the red again shortly thereafter. In January of 1836, the national debt was sitting at a comparatively tiny $37,000.
Pretty much nothing.
From then on, the American debt fluctuated a bit for several years, but remained relatively low until around 1863. Shortly after 1948, America began to pay down the massive debt incurred in the 1930s and 40s, but shortly after 1982, the debt began to build. From 1992 to 2000, the debt began to be paid back again, only for that huge spike after 2001 and 2008, and the rest, as they say, is history. So just what is national debt? Government debt is money that has not been raised by taxes and has been spent on goods and services.
Yeah.
This money has been borrowed. When a government runs a budget deficit, it costs them more to administer the country than it receives in revenue. To make good this shortfall, the government has two choices. One, it prints more money, or two, it borrows more money.
Obviously, printing whole money. I'm sure he's about to talk about that, but obviously that's what I said earlier with the whole inflation stuff. Printing more money obviously doesn't fix the situation. It just devalues the currency that you have, and borrowing money obviously that's only good if you know that you can pay it back in a set amount of time.
money. Although printing more money sounds simple enough to do, doing so would lead to galloping or hyperinflation.
Yeah.
Galloping inflation is when the price of goods and services rises more than 10% per month, and hyperinflation is when the price of services or goods rises more than 50% in a month. To print and distribute more money leads to inflation if there is no corresponding economic growth to justify the surplus cash. Instead, governments issue bonds that investors invest in. The government then gets the money from the investors, and the investors receive an interest on the funds borrowed over a period of time.
Now that's exactly what has happened. Also in the 1929, the Great Depression. I'm pretty sure here in Germany as well. I mean, at some point, people were buying. People were using literally trillions to buy a single bread. That's how devalued the currency was at the time, especially after World War One. I'm pretty sure the same thing is. I'm certain the same thing is happening in places like Venezuela right now, where also the currency is just dead, and people are literally, wiping their behind, with the money. I mean, some people. I mean, you have to carry such. Imagine, look at it this way: if a bank robber, the inflation, here's even for bank robbers, it's not necessarily it's not a good time, because let's imagine they go into they rob a bank, right? They're just getting all the money. At the end of the day, I mean, they might run around with literally 10 bags full of cash, but that might just be worth, I don't know, like $50. I'm not gonna lie. So it's not a good time for anyone.
Just over half of the current $21 trillion US debt is owed to US investors, with the remainder half owed to investors outside the United States. The more the debt grows, the more is spent on interest repayments and less is allocated to what the government should really be doing with taxpayers' money, investing in local public services. Over time, governments risk running into bankruptcy and seeing their economy collapsing. The US has declared itself bankrupt 5 times since its formation, once when it could not meet foreign debts, and 4 times due to internal debts. The first time the US became bankrupt was in 1790, and the last occasion was in 1933. But America is not alone. A total of 83 countries have become bankrupt in the last 200 years. Debt can be reduced in one of 2 ways. Debt is forgiven or debt is paid back. Most of the people, countries, and organizations who are owed money by the states are unlikely to forgive the debt, so the US will probably have to pay it back at some point if it is to reduce the deficit to zero.
I mean, if you forgive debt, it's basically you're just switching out. If one forgives if you got two people, right? You got person A, person B. Person A lends or gives gives person B $10 so that they can buy themselves something, right? Obviously, if person A then forgives person B their debt, person B, obviously has done nothing but gain stuff, but person A has lost it. So they just swapped. You can't just get rid of that. It's not possible.
For a government to start paying back its debt, it will need to spend less than it earns or receives in taxation and run on a budget surplus. Seems simple enough, but the problem is that society becomes accustomed to the level of government spending, especially if they directly benefit from it. Nobody wants to give up what they already have, and nobody wants to pay more taxes. Society in general wouldn't wish to see a cut in spending on healthcare, schools, and other essential services. Cutting back on spending leads to less votes and a loss of power to the next politician who promises more spending.
Keep that in mind.
This is how the problem escalates. So if the American government somehow paid back its debt, then the taxpayer would see more of their tax dollars spent on local government services and less of that dollar paid back to investors in interest. The overall standard of living should also rise for most Americans. Voters would need to accept short-term financial pain for long-term gain. But with the American political system set up as it is, a new president could come along and put all of those good years to waste in a manic spending frenzy. It has happened in the past and will probably happen again in the unlikely event that America managed to reduce its debt to zero. But who could pay off this rising national debt? Really, you have 2 choices. The lower and middle class taxpayers could pay off the debt through tax increases or by inflation. Or the big business monopolies, high class politicians, and corporations could settle it through targeted taxation. Of course, politicians are like everybody else.
Targeted taxation. I like how he mentions the politicians here as well.
Or by inflation. Or the big business monopolies, high class politicians, and corporations could settle it through
high class politicians.
Targeted taxation. Of course, politicians are like everybody else. They don't want to pay taxes, and they don't want the corporations, lobbyists, and high net worth individuals who put them where they are to pay taxes either. To heavily tax the poor normally leads to sharp rises in inflation and a shrinking economy, which is bad for everyone. Paying the debt in full today wouldn't actually make too much of a difference in the economy itself, but it would speak volumes for US creditworthiness should a crisis such as the 2008 financial crisis occur once more. So what would happen if the US paid off all of its debt? The simple answer is not much. The country would function as it does now and will probably put in action plans to increase its debt once again. Countries function normally while in debt as long as the debt is kept to a manageable level and it keeps up with its repayments. The USA definitely walks a fine line trying to balance its budget, and if you're like most people, you could probably use a little help organizing your own finances. With classes to help you manage your finances, create a monthly budget, and even plan and start your own online business.
All right, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, in case you're interested in Skillshare, definitely go check it out. It's interesting what he says here. Keep it at a manageable level. Well, obviously, 16.4 trillion. I don't know how that is considered manageable. I'm not gonna lie. I'd be interested. I don't know if I missed this, but is the US the country with the highest debt? And if it is, then I mean, what's the second highest and what's the lowest? I mean, the lowest would technically be they're not in debt at all. They have too much funds, not too much funds, but they don't have any debt. They go in the other way. I'd be more than interested to know. Definitely let me know if you're. And if you're in the financial sector, what's the situation? Is it really true what he's saying here? I'd be more than curious. Guys, I hope you don't. Real quick, it's crazy it's crazy to hear that even if the U.S. paid off its its debt, that it would still function as it is right now. Can you even imagine that? 16.4 trillion. You might think like the money must go somewhere. It must be lost from somewhere. It's hard to imagine, honestly. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and if there's any other videos you would like me to react to, give me the name down in the comments of the video, and I'll go check it out. Other than that, guys, I really, really appreciate every single one of you that are watching, and yeah, take care. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.